Hello, everyone. Well, I want to thank CPAC for putting me after Benny and Jack Posobiec. I did not have enough coffee this morning to match either one of them, but anyway, hello, everyone. It's funny that Jack preceded me because 2 years ago, we were on the stage together. Jack, myself, Amanda Milius, and Kash Patel. Never in a million years would we have thought that we would now be swearing in today Kash Patel as the FBI director. Amazing, amazing. And a year ago, I was here speaking about how Joe Biden and his Department of Justice was continuing to round up his political opponents and try to throw them in jail, including President Trump, and of course, hundreds of January 6th protesters. Never would I have imagined we would be here after President Trump being elected and then taking the really bold, courageous, and compassionate move of pardoning almost all of the J6ers. So I really want to commend the president. He deserves a lot of praise for what he did, because that was not an easy decision to make. I also want to give a shout out to Matt and Mercedes Schlapp and CPAC, because when no one would touch January 6th, even on our side, they gave me a platform early on to talk about what was happening to the J6ers in that prosecution. And without that platform, now it's cool. Everyone's like, yeah, free the J6ers, it's like the cause of the day. But it wasn't back then. And so I want to thank them and praise them also for giving me a platform and then J6ers over the past few years. So at any rate, I'm going to introduce my fellow panelist in a moment, but what an amazing time talking about a year ago what this Department of Justice was doing, and now seeing it turn 180 degrees and, hopefully bringing the reform that is needed, but also cleaning house at the DOJ, getting rid of the very dangerous partisan operatives who LARP as government lawyers in that department, and then, of course, the FBI. So I'm very excited to see what Attorney General Pam Bondi and her team does, and, of course, Kash Patel and his team. They have a lot on their plate. They really need our support and prayers because they've got, I think, arguably the biggest task ahead of them in the Trump administration. So I'm going to bring out my friend, and we're going to have a discussion about January 6th, and he was the chief of the Capitol Police on January 6th. We have become friends over the past few years, so I would like to welcome my friend, Steve Sund. You want to go here?
No, I go.
Perfect.
Thank you very
Hi,
much.
Chief. How are you?
Doing well.
So, Chief, why don't you tell a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of talk about January 6th and your experiences.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, CPAC, for allowing me to be here. 30-year law enforcement veteran, 25 and a half years, a little over 25 with the Washington, D.C. Police Department, where I handled all the major events, 2001, 2005, 9, 13 inauguration, 17, when I was up at Capitol Police. Done a lot of major events, a lot of barricades, a lot of tragic stuff, but love being a police officer up until January 6th.
So I think people are familiar with your work. Of course, you have your book, Courage.
Courage Under Fire, the definitive account of January 6th. And I got to tell you, the current January 6th committee under Barry Loudermilk, and I'm glad Speaker Johnson has continued that investigation. They refer to it as the definitive after action because there's just way too many politicized people's opinions, reports out there. I just want to provide the facts. It's much like I police. You know, my thought on policing and politics is it shouldn't matter to you what political leaning I am, and it shouldn't matter to me what political leaning you are during a traffic stop, a First Amendment activity, or if you call 911 for help, you should get the exact level of service no matter what. And that's kind of how I wrote the book. Just the facts.
So Steve and I started talking, I think, a few years ago, and we have become friends. We have our agreements and disagreements about the interpretation of January 6th and some of the things that happened, but we always are able to discuss those agreeably because I have tremendous respect for him. But what happened to Chief Sund is, despite his constant pleas to add more security for January 6th, of course, those were denied. But then the day after, on January 7th, Chief Sund became the fall guy who was, alongside President Trump, then blamed and accused of being responsible for what happened that day. And so we could talk a little bit about that now, looking back 4 years ago, how that all transpired, how you sort of were, especially Nancy Pelosi's fall guy for that, and then what has kind of happened since then.
So when you look at it and you look back, a lot of people may not realize this. They've heard Donald Trump offered up 20,000 National Guard troops. That most likely is the case. I do not doubt that. I can tell you definitively, I made 12 requests for federal support, including National Guard, both in advance and on January 6th while we were under attack, and was denied. It was only in the 13th request that I finally get approval at 2:09 p.m. on January 6th. So what I've come to learn since January 6th is January 6th was 100% preventable. If security on Capitol Hill hadn't been so politicized, and you know, when you hear Speaker Pelosi say she doesn't have a role in security on Capitol Hill, look at 2 U.S. Code 1970. Look at it before they changed it, because they changed it based on my testimony. It says specifically, I have to go to the Capitol Police Board. I'm the only chief of police in the United States of America that has to get permission to bring in support for my men and women. I went to the Capitol Police Board. They are required to then get concurrence. They have to go to congressional leadership. It's written in the law. Her responsibility is written in law. So when she said she doesn't play a role, she does. So when you look back on it, whether they had approved my request, and the current, the latest report from Congress said if Chief Sund's request had been approved, the perimeter most likely would have never been breached. 1. 2, intelligence. I've done major events in Washington, D.C. for many, many years. I've dealt with the FBI. I've dealt with DHS. They'd put out joint intelligence bulletins. They'd have briefings. They'd have call the chiefs into the SCIFs. They'd do a conference call. They'd make sure everyone has the same intelligence. Intelligence was handled differently, especially even within my own unit. If intelligence had been accurate, I would have gotten support from the Capitol Police Board. I would have gotten support from leadership. And again, January 6th wouldn't have happened. We had many of opportunities to get out of the in front of this train.
I think, too, we've talked about, and you've discussed during congressional testimony and also just interviews, what are some of the things that you've learned over the past 4 years that you didn't know about that day? For example, not being alerted about the presence of FBI informants. You know, we talked about not getting access to intelligence, the presence of undercover agents from numerous law enforcement agencies that you weren't really privy to. So I guess, what have you learned, like what surprised you the most as these revelations have come forward, either congressional testimony, the trials, media reporting?
Well, two things that I think surprised me the most is, one, just how adverse some people up in Congress were to the truth coming out. People may not realize this. When they had the first hearing, February 23rd, 2021, think about that. It's only a couple of weeks after January 6th. They didn't want me to testify. I actually had to go and request through the Rules Committee that I be allowed to testify. I told them I will be there in person, I promise you. And sure enough, if you look at it, I'm the only one that showed up in person. Everyone else was videotaped in. The other aspect was, again, the domestic terrorists that we now, people are saying, oh, the FBI was tracking domestic terrorists. That, again, started the day after my testimony, February 24th, 2001. Jill Sanborn testified and said that the FBI was tracking domestic terrorists coming to the January 6th committee. Now we know from GIO reports and various other reports that as of January 6th, they were tracking, I think, approximately 19 to 26 domestic terrorists coming to Washington, D.C. That sure as hell would have been something that I'd like to know about. as a chief of police of a Capitol Police, that they were coming. And when they talk about tracking domestic terrorists, I mean, they're tracking them with people. They're not tracking them with like the janitorial crew. They're tracking them with people. So it's not unusual for undercovers to be in the crowd. You're talking about major events in Washington, D.C. It's probably a SOP, but it would have been great to know that.
So a little bit your experience with the January 6th Select Committee, who now, of course, all of the members and all of the staff were pardoned by Joe Biden. So no one can be held accountable for the destruction of evidence, tampering with witnesses such as Cassidy Hutchinson, and other malfeasance that we know actually happened with that committee. So, but they didn't really want the truth from you either.
Yeah, I had a very interesting interaction with them. One, it became clear early on that their focus wasn't trying to get to what the American people want to know, what really happened on January 6th. Their focus was predetermined outcome. It was to focus on basically 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. How was Donald Trump responsible for this? I went in there. I had, you'd think the chief of police, they'd want me testifying in public. Absolutely not. When we had our interview, it got very contentious. When I repeatedly tried to refer them back to my responsibility to go through the Capitol Police Board to get assistance for my men and women and how I did that in advance of January 6th, they wanted no part of that. They did not want you, the American people, to know that I had gone out of my way to try and bring in resources to protect the United States Capitol. And then it got, like I said, it got contentious. It was a 6-hour interview. You didn't see a word of that on TV. That was, I thought, was concerning. That made me realize real quick that they weren't looking for the truth. And then when you watch, a lot of people are like watching some of the videotape, and I've heard this brought up that, hey, what's going on with some of the sound that was imported on some of the internal videotape? The cameras inside the Capitol do not have sound. They imported other riotous sounds, other demonstrations, other riots into that. Imagine if any chief of police in the United States of America had changed dash cam videos, body-worn cameras videos, and imported separate audio. What do you think would happen? You'd lose all distrust. So when you look at Biden pardoning the January 6th committee, one, committees on Capitol Hill already have certain levels of protection. That should be sufficient. When you provide them a pardon, you just delegitimize anything they were doing. Anybody that had concerns for the credibility, you just legitimize those concerns. So I think that was I think that was a disservice, but their focus wasn't getting to the truth.
Well, we have a minute to go. I told you this would fly by. So, but I think your work and your honesty and, yes, your courage in speaking out about the committee and everything that you saw has really helped unravel the January 6th narrative. I think we're going to learn a lot more. Of course, Barry Loudermilk now has a permanent subcommittee under House Judiciary. Attorney General Pam Bondi is also announced that she will be looking into the abuses of the FBI against
phenomenal.
the J6 defendants. And so I think we are going to find out a lot more in addition to what we've already learned.
I think so as well. And I got to tell you, I miss law enforcement. All the law enforcement I've talked to from FDLE speaks very highly of new U.S. Attorney Bondi. So look forward to seeing what she's going to do. But thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, you want to do this?
Yeah, let's get it. I'll come around this way.